Hello, I'm Hugh Coakley from the Guildford Dragon News, and we have the great pleasure to be interviewing the Dean of Guildford, the Very Reverend Diana Williams. Diana, thank you ever so much for giving us your time today. Could I ask you to tell us about your role as the Dean of Guildford?
A dean in any cathedral, there's 42 deans in the country, and I am required to provide the leadership in terms of ethos, direction, the spiritual leadership of the organisation, which is the cathedral. But then also I have a responsibility across our whole geographical diocese with our bishops and archdeacons to support the work of our churches, schools and parishes.
Okay, so running the cathedral must be an absolutely huge task. You have something like 5 clergymen, 250 to 300 volunteers, 27 part-time and full-time staff. That's quite a team. Give me a flavour of what you do, the services, the worship, the work your volunteers and staff do in a typical week, if there is a typical week.
Well, thank you, Hugh. There is no typical week, and I do have a fantastic team that I work with. And in terms of the day-to-day, the running, the operations and management, that's really the responsibility of our Chief Operating Officer. Again, every cathedral has got one. The activity of a cathedral is very varied. Our core purpose is when we gather to offer worship, bookend the days if you like, but also we welcome visitors who come to see a building, come to see part of our cultural heritage, welcome people who come to seek a place of refuge. They may want a quiet place, a place to pray, people of all faiths and none. And in addition, it's generally a cathedral in its community will be the place whereby national and local and international things are celebrated or commemorated, and that's as long as it is wide, really. And we're next door to the University of Surrey, and we have a very close relationship with them, and so a number of major events for the university also take place here, which is a great privilege.
So there's no typical week. But
no.
Attendances are quite low at the cathedral. Often only a handful of people attend the morning service or even the evensong in the evening. How does that affect morale of your clergy and your staff? Does it affect morale?
Not at all. We're aware that when we gather to offer worship to God, and we gather at a time that's not convenient for people who are in work or have got responsibility to get children to and from school, for example. So we gather at 8 o'clock in the morning and we gather at 5:30 in the afternoon. And so unless people happen to be passing and able to come up the hill in a car, it isn't going to be the kind of thing where many people could come to.
Would you consider changing the times to suit people's working practices then?
Well, yes, we would consider that if that was something that was the right thing to do and there was a great groundswell of opinion. People wanted to be able to do that. But I think what we know in the 21st century, churches all over the country, is that the way that people do exercise a Christian discipleship is not just attending services. And therefore I think that's why cathedrals are on the whole growing, the ones in the city centre, because they offer things which are not on a Sunday, for example.
Okay, so the music at the cathedral is special with boys and girls choirs, the professional choir master, the 6 male singers, the organists, the voluntary cathedral singers, and of course the bell ringers. Why aren't Guildfordians flocking to hear this fantastic free music?
Well, I've no idea. I think that there will be people who are not interested in music, people that wouldn't come to a cathedral to hear music. The English choral tradition is a particular, niche interest for those that like it. And like every other cathedral in the country, we have professional musicians who are leading it, our organists and so on. And it is a fantastic opportunity if people are interested in that kind of music. But we do have lots of people that come here for music and for concerts, and those are all ticketed. So people also turn out and pay money to come and hear music in a beautiful setting. Okay.
Can you ever see the cathedral without the cathedral music, without your choir?
No. I think that is one of the bits of the DNA that's in the 42 cathedrals, is the English choral tradition. And not every cathedral has got a professional choir. they will all have professional organists, but they would nevertheless have still music that it aspires to be the quality of our music. I have to say that any other dean would say the same thing. Ours is the best music of all of the 42 cathedrals.
I think I'd agree with you. I think it is fantastic. So thinking about the money now, it costs about £1 million to run the cathedral. Where does the money come from, and do you have a shortfall?
The money comes from a whole variety of places. Each cathedral gets a small grant from the church commissioners towards the lay staff that we need to run it. We also have, of course, that there's a resident Christian community for whom this is their only church, and therefore that regular giving that would be in any Christian church. That is part of our income. We have a professional fundraising arm, which is part of our income. We apply for grants, trust-making bodies, and so on. And then we are able to use the building and the site for commercial purposes, which then does bring in an income stream. We have our seasons and cafe and our shop, and so all of those in common with all cathedrals. It's a place of heritage, lots of visitors, no support from central government at all, so it's very hard work. And in terms of a shortfall, our 18 accounts are just about to come out, and I think it'll be about £80,000 deficit we'll publish. But it's important to note too, I think, for cathedrals, there's only 9 cathedrals that don't run a deficit budget. So I'm not saying it's a good thing to run a deficit budget, but I think one's got to compare apples with apples.
So you're not on your own?
Not at all.
Now, in 2017, you looked to provide an endowment for the cathedral by selling some of your land for housing. And the cathedral threatened it might have to close when if the planning permission that was submitted for 134 houses would be refused. Well, it was refused. The council did reject your application, but the cathedral hasn't closed down. So what has changed so that the cathedral is still open?
Well, the planning committee refused the application, not the council. We had very strong support from the council and the council planners. And it was recommended for approval. So I think that's important to note too. There was a couple of things that were conflated at the time, one of which was the work that was being done on the cathedral, inside the cathedral, to remove the acoustic plaster, which had asbestos in it, and if we'd had a fall of asbestos we would have needed to close the cathedral. But in addition, I think that there was also quite a lot in the press about cathedrals not having funding centrally and the church not able to bail out any cathedrals. The selling of the 7 of our 26 acres has to do with being able to have a pot of money to invest so that the income is there in perpetuity for the ongoing repairs and maintenance of the cathedral, and we currently don't have an endowment like many new cathedrals. So that's what we need it for, the endowment for our successors.
So will you be submitting a new application, and if yes, how will it differ from the one that was not approved?
I don't know how it will differ because we've not got to that stage yet, but we've entered into a partnership with Vivid Homes, which is a registered social landlord, the biggest provider of social housing in Hampshire, and we will with them develop a scheme then which is compliant with Guildford Borough. Again, we worked very closely with Guildford Borough planners the last time, we will this time as well. And so I don't know how it will differ because that will emerge within the discussions which haven't yet taken place.
So you've changed your partner developer from I think it was Linden Homes before to now potentially subject to contracts being signed with them to Vivid Homes. They're a social housing provider. Does that mean there'll be more social housing, you think, or more affordable housing? How do you think, especially you as a church, you're not just a standard developer, you're a church.
The model that Vivid uses is very attractive to us as a chapter because it's about community building. And 6-7 years ago, when chapter first was looking for someone to work with, registered landlords weren't in the market of actually building. They've managed what other people build. And so Vivid's model, which is to do very decent subsidy for affordable rent, the mix of tenure in terms of the affordable housing, so some for sale, some for shared equity, some for rent, that was very attractive to us. And in terms of the total percentage of affordable housing, that's also determined by individual local boroughs and so on, and therefore it would be the same. We will be compliant, but there will only be the amount of commercial housing out buy to let to sell commercially that's required in order to fund the other.
Is Vivid Homes profit making?
No.
It's not. Okay.
No.
So there's likely to be a difference from a developer.
It's a different build.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, it's a different business model.
The Dragon asked people for their views on the cathedral, and most said, I think it's about 75%, said that they would miss it if it was gone, but only because it's a landmark, something to show they'd arrived home. Is Guildford Cathedral relevant to people in Guildford?
I think and our research has shown the same. It is relevant to people in Guildford, clearly. 75% said they would miss it as a landmark. I think in terms of what the cathedral does, is it relevant? It's relevant to the people for whom it's relevant. And it's not relevant because it's a landmark, but there's also something about what all churches do in terms of serving their community. It would be the same question to ask of any of the other churches, whether they're relevant or not. And I don't think people would say they're relevant because of the building. They say they were relevant because of what's offered.
But
the community
is the community here quite exclusive? It's white, it's well heeled, it's middle class.
It looks well heeled,
Okay.
but that is not. It is not a homogeneous picture at all. And yes, it's white, and most of Guildford is white, and it isn't exclusive. But I think it's hard to get to here because there is no public transport up to the top of the hill, which is something we would like to be able to get back, and from time to time engaging with the bus companies. And it isn't easy to walk up by any direction, and particularly not if you've got a pushchair or if your mobility is not 100%.
Sounds like it's an insoluble problem.
No, not at all. It's a problem to be solved.
How will you solve it?
Well, I won't solve it on my own.
No.
But we'll solve it is that we participate in the tourism, all the tourism work in Guildford. We would need to move people around Guildford very easily. People don't, not as many people visit the castle who might, for example. Guildford itself is a gem. It really is a gem. And people who live quite locally, who've never been to Guildford, come to Guildford and said, I had no idea it was like this. So Guildford as a town has a huge amount to offer. So in terms of our participating, as much as we can, we're going to improve access, pedestrian access between the hill and the town, across the river. Those kinds of those tables, we have a place at the table.
Okay. Other than civic functions, could everything the cathedral does now not be done just as well in a smaller church? For instance, Holy Trinity, right in the town centre.
Not everything. Some things we do, and we're popular for doing it because we are a cathedral. And so there's lots of stuff that couldn't be.
Like what? So, for instance?
Well, I don't know. I think things like, free family activity day. There is something about, and again, they're local people that come up because people do walk up the top. But to be able to come somewhere that is a cathedral, which is a big, exciting building, and to participate in something that's a couple of hours that's free for the children, and particularly focused on parents and carers, that is something that part of the attractiveness of that is that it is a cathedral. It's not just another church. It's not somebody's back
It is a special building, isn't it? Okay. Last question, Diana. You've been dean now for 5 years, something like that. Have you achieved most or any or all or some of what you set out to achieve?
What I set out to achieve each day is to do my very best that people will be able to discover for themselves the good news of Jesus Christ. And therefore, have I achieved it? How do I know? My prayer is that I don't get in the way of someone encountering Jesus by the way I go about things or by what I say. But that's my aim and my goal, and has been for 45 years.
Fantastic. Diana, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you.